Hello and welcome to another video. Today we'll be taking a look at the Basmachi movement. We'll take a look at the historical context, the origins and the name, some key figures and the leadership, goals and objectives, the guerrilla warfare tactics, the major campaigns and battles, Soviet counterinsurgency measures, decline and suppression, aftermath and impact, and some key events and timelines, as well as cultural and literary depictions, and last of all, the summary of the consequences. Okay, now, first up, let's start off with the historical context. The Basmachi movement emerged in response to the Russian Empire's colonial rule and later Soviet control over Central Asia, particularly in the regions of Turkestan and Bukhara. The fall of the Russian Empire and the chaos of the Russian Revolution created a power vacuum, intensifying local resistance against Soviet attempts to assert control. Early Soviet policies, including forced collectivization, cultural suppression, and anti-Islamic measures, exaggerated tensions and fueled the insurgency. The person that looked at this in his book, The Basmachi, Modern Central Asian Insurgent. Well, that person was Mikhail Volodarsky, and he provides a detailed account of the movement's origins and context. In his book, he states, the Basmachi movement was a complex and multifaceted insurgency born out of resistance to colonial and later Soviet domination in Central Asia. Next up, origins and name. The term Basmachi is derived from the Turk word basmak, meaning to raid or to attack, reflecting the guerrilla tactics used by the movement. Originated among local tribes and communities as a reaction to Russian colonization in the late 19th and early 20th century, gaining momentum during and after World War I. It was also deeply rooted in local traditions, Islamic identity, and opposition to foreign rule. The movement embodied a blend of nationalist and religious sentiments. The Basmachi insurgency drew strength from a potent mix of local traditions, Islamic identity, and fierce opposition to external domination, says E. A. Alworth in his book Islamic Resistance to Imperialism. He explores in that book the cultural and religious underpinnings of the Basmachi movement. Next up, key figures and leadership. Of course, a prominent Ottoman military officer and one-time leader of the Young Turks, Enver Pasha, joined the movement in 1921, lending it an international dimension and military expertise. A leading Basmachi commander, known for his tactical acumen and ability to mobilize tribal support against Soviet forces, was Ibrahim Bek. Next up is Madamin Bek. He was another key leader who played a significant role in organizing resistance efforts and coordinating guerrilla warfare tactics. Next up, goals and objectives. The primary goal was to expel Soviet forces and establish independent, self-governing states in Central Asia. It also aimed to defend Islamic traditions and local customs against Soviet attempts at cultural assimilation and secularization. It opposed Soviet economic policies, particularly forced collectivization, which disrupted traditional agrarian and tribal systems. The guerrilla warfare tactics. The Basmachi relied on guerrilla warfare, using hit-and-run tactics, ambushes, and raids on Soviet convoys and installations. It capitalized on local knowledge and support, leveraging tribal networks and geographic familiarity to sustain their insurgency. It utilized mobility and the vast, rugged terrain of Central Asia to evade Soviet forces and conduct surprise attacks. The Basmachi movement and the Soviet regime in Central Asia, which was written by O. A. Bushkov, provides an in-depth analysis of the movement's military tactics. He says, guerrilla tactics and local support were crucial to the Basmachi's ability to conduct an effective and resilient insurgency against Soviet forces. Next up, major campaigns and battles. The Battle of Kurshab in 1921. It's a significant engagement where Basmachi forces, led by Enver Pasha, clashed with Soviet troops, demonstrating their capability to mount large-scale attacks. Next up is the campaign in Fergana Valley. One of the movement's strongholds, the Fergana Valley saw numerous skirmishes and battles as Basmachi forces sought to control the region. Next up is Tashkent and Bukhara offensive. It attempted to capture major cities like Tashkent and Bukhara, though these efforts often resulted in heavy Soviet reprisals. Next up, Soviet counterinsurgency measures. Military suppressions. The Soviet regime deployed substantial military resources, including the Red Army and Cheka, which was the secret police, to crush the Basmachi uprising. The Soviets exploited tribal rivalries and offered amnesties to undermine Basmachi unity and weaken their resolve. There were also some economic and social reforms. They implemented policies to win over the local population, including land reforms and measures to integrate Central Asia into the Soviet economic system. Next up, decline and suppression. The loss of Enver Pasha in 1922. The death of Enver Pasha in battle marked a significant blow to the movement's leadership and morale. Because of persistent Soviet military pressure and effective counterinsurgency tactics, gradually the movement eroded and their capabilities as well as their territorial control. By the mid-1920s, the Basmachi movement had largely been suppressed, though sporadic resistance continued into the 1930s. The loss of key leaders and relentless Soviet pressure led to the eventual decline and suppression of the Basmachi movement, says Edward J. Erickson in his book Enver Pasha and the Basmachi, The Struggle for Central Asia. Next up, the aftermath and impact. The suppression of the Basmachi movement allowed the Soviet regime to consolidate control over Central Asia, integrating the region into the Soviet Union. The movement left a lasting legacy of resistance against Soviet rule, influencing later nationalist and independence movements in Central Asia. The Basmachi insurgency remains a symbol of local resistance and struggle for autonomy in the historical memory of Central Asian nations. Key events and timeline. 1916. Early resistance against Russian colonial rule begins, setting the stage for the Basmachi insurgency. 1918. Formal emergence of the Basmachi movement in response to Soviet attempts to assert control over Central Asia. 1921 to 1922. Height of the movement's activity, including significant battles and the involvement of Enver Pasha. Mid-1920s. Gradual decline of the movement due to effective Soviet counterinsurgency measures and loss of key leaders. 1930s. Sporadic resistance continues but fails to regain significant momentum. Now the cultural and literary depictions. Historical accounts. The movement has been documented in various historical works and memoirs reflecting its significance in the broader context of Central Asian and Soviet history. Central Asian literature and art often depict the Basmachi as a symbol of local heroism and resistance, contributing to the cultural memory of the region. Contemporary academic studies continue to explore the movement's impact and legacy, offering diverse perspectives on its role in Central Asian history. Now, last up, summary of consequences. First of all, Soviet domination. The suppression of the Basmachi movement facilitated Soviet domination over Central Asia, enabling the imposition of Soviet economic, social, and cultural policies. Soviet efforts to suppress local culture and Islamic practices faced resistance but also led to adaptation and survival of traditions within the Soviet framework. The Basmachi movement's legacy influenced subsequent nationalist and independence movements, contributing to the eventual dissolution of Soviet control over Central Asia in the late 20th century. Thank you for listening. Bye.